You're live.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another week of Bitch with Comrade Misty. I am Comrade Misty. I'm very excited. Today I have somebody who I just recently found through FHL. And so I'm pumped to have a conversation with Kahmali Rose. He is the host of the Radical Democracy Show. And he covers politics and economics through a Black socialist lens. He talks a lot about the same things that I bitch about. So I think this is going to be a fun conversation. So thanks, dude, for coming on. I just found your show, I don't know, probably like 3 or 4 weeks ago, through Nick, actually, Socialist
Awesome.
MMA.
Yeah.
And so, and then I saw the one that you did with Sabrina and Nick, and I'm forgetting who else was on there, but yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you.
On YouTube. Yeah.
Yes.
Unapologetic. Yeah.
That dude, I'm coming to kidnap him. I told him because he's like really impossible to get. You guys talked about it on that show.
Yeah, we talked about it, and I told him how. And I was actually referring to the fact that I saw him respond to you before he responded to me too. And I was like, I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna find you. All right.
But listen, for real, like we interviewed him months ago, but he had really terrible internet issues. Like it just would freeze, and it was like 30 to 45 seconds of like just cutting in and out, or like he would freeze entirely, and it was really bad. And I didn't want to post it because I'm like, you're so much of what you're saying is getting lost, so we didn't post it. And I'm like, we need to have you back on, and that was months ago, and I still haven't been able to nail this guy down.
I had a recent interview like that with Awkward, the abolitionist rapper, anti-fascist. Yeah, like it was an amazing interview, but it seemed to come through clear while, okay when we were doing the interview, but when I checked the video and audio after, it's just been so rough, and it takes so long to try to like edit. And I'm like, I'm losing so much of it here. And so it's such a tough situation to be in. And it's like, I want to broadcast this. This is great information, but the technical issues. And this is the world that we live in, especially folks that are in like rural parts of the country, and there's a lot
I just got decent internet, so
so it's rough out there, it creates these, there's already like imbalances there where people should have, this is one of the things that people should just have a universal access to. It's like, this is the equivalent of just like the town square at this point, and like we should all as a public have access to it. So
there's no reason why we can't. That's what's so frustrating to me, is there's no reason why we can't. Like, we're totally capable of making that happen. It's a choice that we're not doing that.
And it's a choice oftentimes made by political elites and folks that are in different income brackets than most of the folks
who have a way different agenda, care about entirely different things.
Absolutely.
And they're psychopaths.
Exactly. Yes. Often, just very sociopathic in their, in the way that it's just callousness. It's like they have no concern for basic human life. Otherwise, you couldn't be somebody floating around like Bezos with like $180 billion, making a choice to not end hunger, like child hunger, every single day. Like, it's just like wakes up and it's just like, or like, Joe Biden, who wakes up every day and decides like, not going to cancel student loan debt, not going to end qualified immunity, not going to end cash bail. I'm just not going to do it. Just not going to do it. So yeah, you get folks like that.
They're all like that, really, to some degree. You're right, because you don't reach that level of power and you maintain like humanity. It's not possible. You have to exploit people, and you have to lie and cheat and steal and manipulate, and it's not, power doesn't attract decent people, generally speaking. It attracts narcissists and
Yep, absolutely. It success under capitalism is essentially a measure of your willingness to exploit other human beings. And so it's like what we consider successful and what we've like praised as successful in our society for so long under the capitalist system is just it's a measure of how okay are you with with being unethical and inhumane and devaluing human life and basic human decency. And so it's just like, how willing are you to exploit the labor of other people? And if you're not willing to exploit their labor, you simply cannot be successful in the system.
Yeah. And that's what's really kind of daunting, because I feel like, and this is going to sound very I don't know, whatever. But we need like a mass shift in consciousness. Like we need people to completely step away from everything that we thought we knew and examine things differently. Like we really do need like it's again, sounds however you want to take, like a mass awakening. It's the year 2021 and we're still like blowing shit up and committing mass murder for oil. And that's sad. Like really, it's really pathetic to me.
it sucks to like feel like so, and this is what creates so much of the feelings of despair and hopelessness in our society. It leads to so much, as we see the rise in suicide rates and the mass shootings and these sorts of in people, the opioid epidemic that came after a crack epidemic in the 80s that ravaged Black communities, and we see that these are oftentimes these are just what they call diseases of despair. People are feeling more and more hopeless because you see the different Republicans or Democrats, whoever comes into power, and so one of the two in our country, and whoever comes into power, it's more of the same. Nothing seems to change, but the news, if you turn on CNN and MSNBC, they create this whole like outrage culture where it's just like and it's meant to just divert your attention away from the things that actually matter. Exactly.
Yes.
The stuff
actually I'm so glad you brought this up because I in a lot of the shows I've noticed that you focus on something that I'm always very curious about. You always ask people what do you think about electoral politics? Like what do you like, is that even a reasonable thing? And you ask people that all the time, and I am somebody who is very against electoral politics at this point. And so I'm glad that you brought all this up because, we can't vote our way out of this. That's not going to happen. And so but we still have people like trying to pretend like that's an option. Like that's really, I don't know if it could be more clear. Like people pretend like if Nina Turner gets elected, everything's going to be fine. And they did the exact same thing with the squad. Like if the squad just gets elected, and it's really super annoying to me because, when the squad was running, I don't know if people I know that everybody has like a very short memory, but they ran on going to Congress and challenging the Democratic establishment. That's what they ran on. Like they were birthed from
AOC,
the Bernie movement.
Declared that she was willing to be a one-term congresswoman if it meant challenging Nancy Pelosi and challenging the Democratic Party. And if she wasn't going to be unpopular, at least she was going to be principled. And look where she's come in 2 short years, essentially. Look where she's reached and has become a controlled opposition at best is what we can see these folks as. And
I think she always was personally. But that's
absolutely.
just me.
And it's not like I don't care to even debate the idea of like their like motive behind it at this point.
No.
Like I don't care what their motives are. I don't think it's nefarious. I think it's more along the lines of what Chris Hedges said on Bad Faith Podcast. Essentially, they've convinced themselves, they've tricked themselves into believing that, they're better there, making these little incremental changes than if they let somebody, slightly to the right of them come in and so they've convinced themselves that they're better off there doing the nothingness that they're doing than helping than risking a seat in Congress.
That's
which
the
is
narcissism.
and I've seen them, and what really pisses me off about them is this idea that they're not willing to vote as a block, and this them saying that they're voting for their their constituents within their within their districts. And the thing is that they never said that when they were running. I was a massive supporter of AOC. My old profile picture and Facebook picture was a picture of me standing with AOC before she beat Joe Crowley. I had about a 30-minute conversation with her because she just came to Boston in this really small event before anyone who knew who she was. And the things we talked about just her platform and just basic housing as a human right and what that actually looked like in workplace democracy and in issues like that I hadn't seen on her platform yet, things like canceling all student loan debt. And a week after talking to her about that, she had that added on her platform, and she was listening to the people at that point, because it's easy to do that when you have when you're an unknown entity and you're supported by the small base of people. But as soon as they took power, and so like you said, they were talking a very they had very progressive rhetoric, similar to Barack Obama when he was running for president. He was running on this hope and change platform. But the reality is that the system, the idea that we're going to change the Democratic Party just seems at this point very far-fetched to me. It's like you don't change the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party changes you. And that's just the reality of like machine politics.
Yes, and Bernie Sanders has been attempting to transform the Democratic Party for 5 years. They're worse now than they've ever been. It's not working.
Absolutely.
You failed. You
Absolutely.
failed miserably. Like, give it up, homies. That's not happening.
Kyle Kulinski, who's a co-founder of Justice Democrats, recently said on one of his shows, he's like, let's be real, like the Justice Democrats are a failure. It's a failed movement.
Oh, yeah.
I donated to Justice Democrats the day that they announced, I used to be a TYT person back then. And I was, and Cenk Uygur announced it, and Kyle Kulinski, I was a big fan of Kyle Kulinski's, still believe that he does, really solid work. And so I was, watching that, and they announced it, and it made so much sense to me at the time. I was, 5 years ago, I was just not as politically engaged. I was believing in a system of capitalism and meritocracy, even though it had largely screwed me over. I just thought, oh, my family was poor because we deserved it, because we didn't work hard enough, and we just needed to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. And I believe that line. And then, over time and just seeing the, good people, hardworking people get screwed over left and right in this system, and not just here in this country, but all over the world, just based on things that were decisions that were being made here in America to bomb other countries and go around the world, just recklessly. Our CIA just committing coups. It left
we're the world's largest terrorist organization.
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt.
It's not even close.
Yeah, yep,
it's not even close.
And somehow you're considered, like that's like a radical position, for some people to say that. And
that's just obvious,
Exactly. Poll anywhere else around the world, and they'll tell you exactly that.
Well, to be fair, they don't have access to the 5 corporations that control all of our media, so they haven't been told what to think yet. So it's not their fault.
Absolutely, exactly.
It's not their fault. But I'm glad that you bring up like foreign policy and stuff, because to me that's the biggest divide on the left. There are people who think that they're left, and they may have left leanings, but they are still very much status quo people. They don't really care about imperialism. They don't really think about foreign policy. I call them hipster liberals. I used to call them liberals that want healthcare until force the vote happened. And then I was like, well, maybe they don't actually want healthcare. I'm not sure now. But yeah, I feel like that, like, that's the biggest divide that I have seen, is that there are a lot of people who just don't give a shit about imperialism. They don't think about that. They're very focused on domestic issues. And, to me, that's is that something that you've noticed too, that there's like this huge divide? Yeah.
We recently had on a PhD candidate, Tamanisha John, on our show to talk about U.S. imperialism in the context of Israel-Palestine. And she is an amazing, just incredibly knowledgeable. She's a PhD candidate in international affairs, and she has, she has an ability to talk about these issues in a way that's very, understandable to a layperson and approachable, and is always centering of the discussion on not just being so US centric and even Western centric in our mindset, but to open our political discussion up to this understanding of how the actions of our country, of the United States, impact people all around the world through through colonialism and imperialism. And to even myself in my show, oftentimes, I'll cover things, and in order to try to make the argument, because I feel like my audience is very, most of my audience is from the US. And so I try to frame my arguments. Oftentimes I've realized in two US centric a way. It's almost it reeks of American exceptionalism, where you sort of get into this bubble. And I think that for there's some people who are sort of 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 the left, but I consider, when I talk about the left, I mean what I'm referring to is like revolutionary leftists. There are there's some variation between anarchist all the way to some authoritarian leftists, but it's revolutionary leftists who believe in like replacing the current systems with the new system. And then there's of course the sort of liberal base of the Democratic Party that some people call left, but they're not what we would on the left would really consider leftist. And I think that there's sort of two groups in in there. With the liberals, you get the folks that are actually they're neoliberal, which are, you know, they believe in this idea of like, you know, this capitalist system and the, you know, this, you know, some market fundamentalism to a degree and extent, and the idea of things like nation states and the validity of things like nations and states. And so they are actually okay and accepting of and happy with the you know, what goes on through US imperialism. They're perfectly fine with it. They're aware of it, and they're accepting of it. And then I think that there's a contingent of people that are, you know, of the left, but are simply sort of politically disengaged in a way. And I think that that's what I find more so in a lot of you know, Black sort of communities, folks that are passively left. You know, they're not actively neoliberal. They're just sort of passive leftists in that they're so, and I don't blame, you know, there's a lot of people where it's like, it's reasonable, I think, to, if your life sucks and everything, you know, you're a poor person, you're homeless, you're struggling, you're living paycheck to paycheck, which 80% of Americans are doing. I think there's some, you know, ability to, you know, some fairness in being focused on, well, I'm just trying to survive kind of mindset, which capitalism has us under. And in that way, you sort of lose sight of, you stay in this bubble and you lose sight of how those actions all around the world actually do impact your life. And what I tend to do is try to frame these things in a way of talking about how US imperialism sort of comes back around to bite us in our ass, you know, often. And it's in what you know, Tamanisha John, you know, in that discussion that we had with her, I think opened my mind up to, was the idea that we need to start to frame it a little bit differently, even, and to start to really think about the impact that our actions have on those people in these other countries, and how that, you know, is in and of itself very important, and we shouldn't lose sight of. As somebody that considers themselves a socialist, I consider myself cosmopolitan. I believe in a worldwide community, essentially, in that we are one, you know, global community, essentially, and need to think of ourselves as such, instead of these different, as opposed to being like international and thinking of ourselves as all these different separate nations, and focusing too much on that. I think that we need to really see ourselves of how we're all interconnected, and we should be thinking about building a, you know, working class solidarity across not just, you know, different state lines,
a human collective. We're here
Absolutely.
Together. We might as well work together. I'm not saying that we all have to be best buds and hang out and party together, but I don't see why civility seems like that's such a radical idea. Like, want to evolve towards like a civilized society, like a legitimately civilized society where we try to take care of everybody, and we make sure that everybody can see a doctor and that they can eat and they can have a place to stay, and either have like a decent standard of living. And that doesn't seem like, that seems like a very reasonable thought to me. But then people tell me that I'm like, you know, a crazy hippie conspiracy theorist, purist. And it's really weird that we don't, why is that not the end goal? Like, it's really bizarre to me that, and I say this all the time too, like, we tell our kids, like, use your words, don't hit your friends. And then our world leaders blow people up for profit. And it's really fucking bizarre. Like, it's a really weird system that we've created for ourselves here. And so it's just really fucking, and I hate when people ignore imperialism. And I think that something that needs to be said too is, you said that, you know, people are very busy, and you're absolutely right. And I am much more empathetic to somebody who just doesn't know than I am to somebody who should know, but it ignores the obvious. But, you know, I just think that there's a great deal to be said about the lack of, people don't see war anymore. Ever since Vietnam, they learned very quickly that seeing, you know, the coffins coming home of our dead soldiers, and seeing the pictures of the, you know, horrendous war crimes that were taking place, and all, like, it doesn't pull test well, you know. That doesn't work. So they stopped doing that. And so I think that there's like this level of complete disconnect. People don't know what war is. Like, it's very abstract. You know, we have people like Brian Williams, like, nutting himself over, you know,
missiles,
bombs.
You know, they're so beautiful, you know.
Oh my God, that was the most disgusting. I mean, really, like, that's going to go, like, blow some shit up and potentially some people. And you're talking about how beautiful that is. That's really gross, dude. You need help.
it's disgusting on a level, and so callous, and we, the same people that are like, they talk about, Donald Trump's fascism and don't see like the problem with our imperialist, we are supporting essentially a fascist, government and entity, a colonialist, entity in Israel, and just because of who happens to be in power, you get a different set of people that are willing to criticize just based on who happens to be the person at the top at any given moment. And it's like, we need a consistency to say like, no, this is, and there's some famous quote, I don't know who said it, but it's like, CNN shows the bombs taking off and Al Jazeera shows the bomb, shows where they land. And it's like, we here in the US, our corporate media really does an amazing job of sort of, again, just diverting people's attention away. They'll cover things like Malaysia flight, whatever the hell it was, for days and days on CNN. God. And you got like, Don Lemon, like with his little model airplane, theorizing that it may have flown into a black hole or the Bermuda Triangle. And that's considered like serious news. And that's what things like the YouTube algorithm is now designed to elevate news organizations like CNN. And they recently, this isn't like me making this stuff up or like sitting here being salty. It's like they're one of the executives at YouTube recently was out, and people can find the clip of this online of her talking about the fact that they have in the last year, reduced what they call borderline content on YouTube being recommended by 70%. So, like that's being cut more than in half for people that are in, we're all considered borderline content because we might happen to take a pro-Palestinian view of the world and say, we're against colonialism and settler colonialism of any kind. And that's considered a borderline view, unfortunately. But folks like CNN and the New York Times can be considered reputable news outlets, but they were the WMDs and they're never, you can always fail up. And exactly, Russiagate, they look
Syrian gas attacks
and oxygen.
Yes. Yeah, but that's exactly how our mainstream media is designed. That is exactly how it's designed. It is infotainment. It's not meant to inform you. It's not meant to educate you. It's not meant to show you the truth. It's meant to propagandize you on the highest level. Mainstream media is oozing with propaganda, and it's it's really unfortunate that so many people still, their audience is shrinking. There's no question about it. I think that some of the attacks on independent media come directly from that fact that they are struggling crazy. Especially like MSNBC, now that Trump is gone. It's unbelievable. But this is the cycle. You know what I mean? When there's a Republican in the presidency, then MSNBC does well. When there's a Democrat in the presidency, Fox News does well. And it's the same thing. It's all the same. It's a big club, it's a, cesspool of corruption.
And we ain't in it.
No.
And we ain't in it. Yeah.
No. And people need to stop pretending like we are. But the propaganda is thick. It's so bad. And it's only getting worse. We had all of the mainstream media giving Donald Trump billions of dollars in free airtime, and then pushing Russiagate for 5 years. They're still doing it.
Yeah. No, I just saw a story today, I think, that was somehow managed to frame it. Oh, it was something about, there was something that activists, they hackers like hacked in, and I'm trying to remember what something with because they did there was the recent like colonial pipeline spill that they then turned around and blamed on Russia.
Robbie Yeager.
And then there was recently hackers did something to mess up commercial slaughterhouses. There was some commercial slaughterhouses that got there, and they weren't able to like slaughter animals for like a few days, and they have now framed that as like Russian hackers went in and did this. And the thing that they're doing is that when they've conditioned folks that are the sort of MSNBC, CNN viewers to now hear Russia and think Russia bad, and I'm not supportive of Russia. I'm not supportive of any, pretty much any state, anywhere. And so I'm not supportive of Russia, but they've made it so that people will not even investigate information for themselves or sort of look beyond the surface level because they hear these sort of, words. It's manufacturing of consent, as Noam Chomsky, points out and has defined. And what they do is they get you to hear Russia and then simply turn off your, any kind of critical, thought that you have at that point, and to simply hear, okay, well, it's Russia, so it must be bad. When really, maybe we should be thinking about why would Russia, let's be real, want to care to hack in and be stopping slaughterhouses? Like that sounds like something that eco activists or like animal rights activists would try to do, and instead, and that's something that we can consider and talk about and discuss on the left in a sensible way. But instead, they just frame it under it's Russia, and then hopefully everybody stops paying attention. Same thing with the Colonial Pipeline spill, where it's like, again, they just think that they can say Russia. You'll think you'll be in support of the pipelines at that point because you're like, I'm anti-Russia.
Before we even just the minute that it was announced that it was a hack, like they got hacked, everybody was like, it's Russia. Like that was the immediate response, because people have been conditioned to think that everything right now is Russia. And that really started with McCarthyism. And we had this built-in boogeyman that we could use, and they bring it out whenever they need to have some manner of control. But you're right. Like the propaganda, if you pay a close attention, one of the biggest tricks that they use is to open with either the word safety or security or something like that, because that immediately instills fear into your brain, and everything you hear from then on, you will not react rationally to, because your lizard brain has been triggered. And there's a ton of these little tricks that they use, and they're very, 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 very good at it. And that's kind of why I focus so much on propaganda and free speech and press freedom, because it's that to me, that's terrifying. The fact that we have maybe 5 or 6 corporations that own 90% of our media and information, and that's dwindling. And we have all kinds of anti-protest bills, and we have all kinds of anti-free speech bills, and all this stuff is getting passed little by little. They're chipping away at it, and nobody's paying attention. And in fact, a lot of people are cheering it on, which is really fucking weird to me. Yeah, it's really weird to me.
They're able to, I think, sneak a lot of legislation in under the radar while you have a Democrat in power. They know how it works. When you have a Republican in power, you can sneak certain legislation under the radar and frame it as pro right wing, when it's really it all typically amounts to pro corporate typically. But there's also the ability to sneak in right wing legislation under with Biden in power. They just continuing things like the slave labor in ICE, detention centers. The Prospect, American Prospect, just put out a story on that, on the fact that they are ICE, and ICE was already being sued for
Biden is worse than Trump
having slave labor. Yeah, exactly.
Biden is worse than Trump.
We still got kids in. Yeah, we still have kids in cages, and what they're able to do is they don't have the same pushback against them, both in the media and by the public, largely because it's not Trump, and he's not tweeting bad tweets out, and and the rhetoric isn't there, so that people aren't paying attention to all the actions that are taking place, and nothing, as Biden promised, nothing is fundamentally changing. It's the same. I honestly don't think that we would see much difference under a Biden or a Trump. It's these little things around the edges, but the system always remains in place. The system will always remain in place as long as we have, and we're beholden to just spending so much of our lives. I used to be, all my donations and my volunteer work was all being spent on electoral politics and funneling our time and our energy and all of our, in our money into electoral politics. And I think that it's become very clear that is not, I don't think that we can abandon it 100%, never go back to, we want to, there are reasons to hold, things like votes and we can maybe, the reality is I don't believe that ultimately that's where we want to be. But I can see
No, our current system is not gonna work.
It's untenable as it is.
Yes.
And we can't, and that's why I try to, and I've been having a sort of crisis of faith, kind of, not crisis of faith really, but just trying to reflect and look at and reevaluate even my own show and the work that I'm doing to try to make sure that I'm using the platform and the space and the time to try to actually direct people's attention towards the things that they should be directed towards, instead of what typical corporate media wants to direct it towards. And even many progressives and folks like TYT is pretty infamous for this at this stage of focusing a lot of people's time and attention on and money onto electoral politics, where nothing is changing, even though we spend so many years of working and paying to get these people elected, and then they turn around and they operate the same way that the Democratic Party has always operated. At what point do we say, okay, electoral politics, it's really not it? Let's stop getting excited about the Nina Turners and all that sort of stuff, and stop even turning people's attention towards that, and start talking about what are we actually going to start to do to build
do some mutual aid, fam. Go, like, don't donate to a politician. Go, if you have a mutual aid group in your area that you really like, I highly recommend Food Not Bombs wherever you can find it. Shout out to Keith McHenry. But or there's a multitude of different organizations or different really kick-ass mutual aid groups. The more local, the more decentralized, the better. But do that. Don't donate to some politician who's they're not working for you. None of them, not even your favorite. Nope, not even your favorite. They don't work for you. They are narcissists, they're careerists, they're opportunists. They're there for them. And if they can accidentally help you every once in a while, then they will. They're going to go along with exactly as they're told. Whatever the powers that be tell them to do, they're going to do. They're not there for you. And listen, like, people tell me all the time, well, for somebody who doesn't believe in electoral politics, you sure do talk about it a lot. I really wish I didn't fucking have to, but so many people still believe in this and still hold on to the fact that we can somehow, transform this system, and that we can fix the Democratic Party, and that we can vote our way out of this. When, I mean, y'all just go watch the Combo Couch's election integrity coverage. Our elections, I don't care what you think about the 2020 election, or whether or not you think it was whatever. If it happened in the United States, it was not a legitimate election, period. Our elections are garbage. They're garbage. We consistently rank dead last among Western democracies for election integrity. That's not bullshit. That's not hyperbole. That's not tinfoil hat. That's real life. Our elections are garbage, period. End of story. It's not even up for debate. So why are people not worried about, like, you're going to vote your way out of this in these elections? Really? That's your plan? Great. That's a really great idea.
50% of the country votes in our elections at this point. Like, that's not a healthy democracy. Like, that's not what anyone should consider a valid democracy. When, barely in midterm elections, it's abysmal. It's like less than a third of the country typically voting in midterm elections. So, but they've reduced the idea of democracy in our country down to this notion of going and showing up and voting for a, pre-selected group of politicians every 2 to 4 years at best. And so when you've reduced the idea and the concept of democracy down to that narrow definition, then all of a sudden, you think that the U.S. is actually going around the world spreading democracy, dropping its democracy bombs all over, Asia and Africa, and so you start to actually believe that nonsense. And so you really have to. That's why I'm such a a staunch advocate for things, building dual power. We have to start to think about how the left is going to develop dual power through systems like workplace democracy and cooperative economies, and building economic collectives and local sustainability. Like, these are the core tenets of in thinking about that, not just here in the United States, but in a cosmopolitan way of looking at the whole world and thinking, how are we going to not just cooperate with people here in the United States, but also workers and poor people everywhere, until we're not just a bunch of workers and poor people, and that's not all that defines us. And so I'm an advocate for workplace democracy, and in starting to get, because we need to get people have no idea what democracy even is at this point, because we're so detached from the real idea of actual direct democracy. And like, people need to get a feel for what that actually is, how that works, how to actually participate in democracy. And like, we can't call ourselves a democracy if the place where the majority of adults spend the majority of the conscious hours of their lives, which is in the workplace or on their way to work or coming home from work. Most of us are spending, somewhere between 10 to 12 hours a day doing that, at least 5 days a week. And we don't have democracy in those institutions. We go into the workplace and we don't have democracy there. We have some authoritarian top-down structure where there's a handful of people, that the employer, and they make all the decisions, who gets to
and
work,
all the money.
Exactly. They collect all the profits from the surplus of our labor as workers. They sit on their asses and they collect, and they're not contributing in the way that the workers are contributing. But we've convinced ourselves through like capitalism that like, oh no, we need leaders. And that reinforces itself in things like whatever we do in our economic system, it tends to reinforce itself and reproduce itself in our political system. So we build these top down, authoritarian, business places, and then it should be no surprise that we have these sort of unaccountable leaders in our political system that are ruling from above, and it's very oligarchic. It's the wealthiest people that get to control society, and that's not a system that the majority of us I think would say is a healthy democracy or anything resembling what we actually want. And so I think the way to do it is to start by getting people used to democracy, like where they're spending the majority of their times, and start to democratize all of our institutions, our workplaces, our businesses, our homes, our housing. Like, why are we letting landlords exist still? Like, why do we need landlords? Like, what, we're not in feudal times anymore. We do not need lords of the land. Like, we can do this ourselves. We know how to clean up homes and maintain homes. And I'd rather be doing that work in like maintaining something in my local community and, in surviving on that than what the hell we're doing right now, this mess that we're in right now at this point.
But wait, are you telling me that Jeff Bezos doesn't actually earn all that money? Like he doesn't work really hard? He works really hard. He really does.
Like a billion times harder than all of his workers,
at least
every single day. Single day.
He's really just like a saint. Like that work ethic on him, oh man, he just really has earned everything. He deserves it. Totally.
Could you imagine like if all the workers of Amazon had workplace democracy, do we think that the workers of Amazon would collectively get together and vote democratically to give Jeff Bezos and his ex-wife, who is now this like the 20-something richest person in the world at this point, like $80 billion or $100 billion. Meanwhile, they're like pissing in bottles and shitting in bags while they're on the job. Like, does anyone think that anyone,
and that's normalized?
Exactly,
we normalize that. Like, that's normal in this country. Like, that's a real thing. Like, what you just said sounds fucking crazy. This guy who owns this company has billions and billions of dollars, or he was the richest man, one of the richest men in the world. Then he got divorced, and now that's not so much true anymore. But he's still unbelievably, disgustingly wealthy. And he like does nothing. He does nothing. He exploited a bunch of people, fucked a bunch of people over. But his workers pee in bottles. Like, that's a real thing in the United States of America, and it's normalized. People don't like, why are we not in the streets about that shit?
Exactly. That's not freedom. Like, that's not freedom. No. That's not what freedom looks like. Like that. This is not the kind of like choices that I want to have. Like what size bottle, what flavor of soda bottle do you want to piss in today? Like on the job is not the kind of choice that I was looking forward to in a free society.
No, it's ridiculous. It is fucking ridiculous. And that's it. It really is just frustrating, because to me, it's just it's common fucking sense that, a handful of people shouldn't be able to hoard all of the resources and wealth while billions of people around the world suffer. That to me, that seems very commonsensical. And the fact that we have to, like, I guess I'm just depressed that we haven't evolved past this shit as a species.
I'm scared that we're in this like scary situation where like our lives have been made through like small little like modern creature comfort sort of. Our lives have been made comfortable enough, especially here in the United States, I think, where we're insulated in a way where our lives are just comfortable enough that it's like, all right, we feel like we have enough to lose that we're unwilling to risk, but we're like all teetering on the edge of like destitution at this point. And it's scary because it's like, but they've gotten us just comfortable enough to where we're not in the streets, like, and we don't have enough of a revolutionary, modern history in the United States that we can fall back on that. Like people in France, like Macron, like
they're doing it now.
That they were gonna, like, they don't play around. Like they're like, because the French Revolution wasn't, they have that in their recent, in their memories, in their political memory, and they don't, and so they, the Yellow Vest movement, that thing spawned out of Macron suggesting the idea of a carbon tax on gas, and people were just like, absolutely not, hell no. And meanwhile, we couldn't even get a $15 minimum wage passed. We can't get a goddamn vote on Medicare for all
in the middle of a pandemic.
In the middle of a pandemic. Like, when else? And I said this, like, at the time of Force the Vote, I said, I think that the anti-Force the Vote people are making a once in a lifetime mistake. I have a video on my channel about it, right before they do the vote, and they voted, I think, on my birthday, which hurt my soul. Like, it was just like, this is what you give me for my birthday, damn it. And it's just like, and it was like, they were making a critical mistake at that point, because we had an overlap of this economic crisis once in 100 years. Like, we've seen nothing like this economic crisis since the Great Depression. The mass unemployment at this scale, in this rate, nothing like it since the Great Depression. Once in a 100-year pandemic since the 1918. I don't even want to call it the Spanish flu, because that's propaganda. It originated in from on a military base in Kansas, I believe it was, and so. But the 1918 pandemic, we hadn't had anything like that, overlapping with a once in an over 100-year. It's been since like 1880, I believe, since we had this small of a margin in our Congress. So we've got a margin of about five or so people in our Congress on any given vote. And so you have this unique circumstance where the left and the so-called, progressives in Congress, if they were really about anything, that was their moment to show us. And when they didn't succeed when they were showed that they were unwilling and pushed back in such a way on Force the Vote, and were unwilling to risk nothing really at that point, to fight for something that, look, here we are, we still don't hear anything about how are we getting Medicare for all? How is it any better? How is that going to put us in any risk or danger in any way? But they proved it then and there to me, and it really, like, that's when I became got super demoralized about electoral politics. That was the final nail in the coffin for me, was Force the Vote, because it was like, that's it. That's what everything that we were working for, and that the people that had volunteered and spent their time and their money and their energy getting,
that was the whole fucking point.
That was it. That was it right there.
The whole fucking point to the squad. That was your whole purpose. That was your whole fucking purpose, was to get into Congress, challenge the Democratic establishment, and to really put some pressure on them. And putting pressure on them means not voting for. First of all, I shouldn't have even had to ask you to not vote for Nancy Pelosi. Period. End of story. That shouldn't have even been on the table. No, you don't get to. No, there is no voting for Nancy Pelosi. Period. End of story. Unless she's giving you a laundry list of concessions, you're not voting for Nancy Pelosi. And
even then, I would be very,
I want
very,
shit up front.
Exactly. It's like. Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
I'm not taking your word on anything. You give me like half or at least a dozen concessions up front. Like, I want them done today, and then I'll vote for you. And then we'll talk about, like, moving forward, what you're going to do for me. But no, why would you not do that? It's you're going to vote. She covered up the torture program. She lied us into a war. She, refused to prosecute war criminals. Really? That's what you're going to vote for? And
everything we believe in. Like, she is adamantly, vociferously against everything we believe in. So why would we throw our support behind someone like that? With, again, no concession whatsoever. I think that it should have been the default, really, like you said. But really, there absolutely needed to be a coherent strategy put into play at that point, to use the leverage of a vote. Like, that's what voting is. Like, that's where your leverage exists. And to just, unilaterally disarm at that point and say, no, we're just throwing up our arms, there's nothing we can do. It really showed me what they were about and what was going to come. So that's why when the $15 minimum wage failed, I'm no longer surprised by things like that. I'm not surprised that, they get together and we get a 213 to 212 vote on increasing funding to police. Like, these
and
people,
progressives abstain. Fuck off.
The same progressive, the same AOC that claimed that it was, a dereliction of duty. That wasn't her exact quote, but she said, something along those lines, in regards to people voting present on the impeachment of Donald Trump, after he was already out, so that's considered, like a dereliction of duty to not, to vote present on that. But it's not to vote present on something like increasing funding to police, when you have literally been running around the country using slogans like defund the police. I found every single one of those progressives that voted present, Jamal Bowman, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, who all voted present on that, they all have tweeted out support for, quote, defunding the police. So in on multiple occasions, especially somebody like Jamal Bowman. So the idea that in the wake of something like this, that you would allow that to and it only took one of them, because a tie vote in Congress goes, that's a loss for the, so the it doesn't pass at that point. So all we needed was one of them to vote. And to me, I don't believe for a second that was just coincidental. Like, no, I don't believe for a second. Not. And I saw, I think Chelsea Manning said something similarly on Bad Faith podcast recently, and I was like, that's exactly right. Like, that's I needed to hear somebody else say it, because I was just like, yes, I'm not, it's not just me. It's like, there's no way that these people aren't coordinating and saying, how can they're doing the same thing that they do for the establishment, the corporate Democrats. They like to pass around and put a different person up to be the sort of,
the fall guy.
Exactly, the fall guy. Exactly. Yeah. It's Joe Manchin on $15 minimum wage.
They're each given their issue that they're allowed to be, quote unquote, brave on.
Exactly.
Like somebody may be able to speak out a little bit stronger on Israel. Somebody may be able to speak out a little bit stronger on like abolishing ICE or whatever. They're each given their assignment where this is the issue you're allowed to like step a little bit out of bounds on. But other than that, everybody's playing ball. You all know your roles, and they play their roles. And that's, I always get really excited when people understand that, because that's like one of the most basic things that so many, like, people really genuinely, and it's not just amongst the Democratic Party. Democrats and Republicans work together. They 100% work together. They make sure that the votes are going to go the way that they're supposed to go. And if it has to come down to like a really, close vote so that it looks a certain way, they do that. Like, it's all coordinated. It's theater. It is 100% theater. You have no control. You have no influence. They don't work for you. They are controlled and owned by corporations, and they're all owned and operated by the exact same people. There may be like slight differences here and there. Like somebody may get a shit ton more oil donations than somebody else, and somebody else may get way more big pharma, but they all generally work for the exact same people, and they don't give a shit about you. They don't.
And these, these donors, they play a game where they know they give a little bit to all of these different people, and they know that they can work those different channels that they have to make sure that these votes, no matter what, at the end of the day, it's always working out for one corporation or another, and never for working people or poor people. It's never that, or marginalized people. It's done for corporations. Even when something seems to be pro marginalized group A or B, it's always done in the context of being really pro corporation. It's like the corporations have okayed it, the wealthy donors have okayed it, and so now this is profitable essentially. So they'll do things like acknowledge things like gay rights or Black humanity. So insofar as it gets them the votes that they need, and and it still is comfortable and okay with corporations, and as long as those two things, wherever the Venn diagram of those two things meets up, that's the issues that they're willing to concern themselves with. And like you said, it's just a game of playing, who's gonna be the one who gets to pretend to be courageous on this issue or that issue, because we want to make sure that we don't lose too many voters. We want to keep ourselves in power, so we can't lose too many voters. So we can't have AOC always be the person that is, necessarily the fall person on this, failing on this legislation or another. And it's sad because it's the opposite. With the corporate Democrats, they're picking the fall guy because they're gonna push some really terrible legislation, and they always seem to, they always get to win their terrible legislation. For the progressives, it's the opposite, where like they get to choose what they get to fail on, because they don't succeed. Like the progressives don't win on anything really, like, and the so-called progressives, like I'm so sick of like that's why it's anyone outside of like these people that even label themselves as like democratic socialists, it's like they really just embarrass the label in the title of
hipster
socialism.
Liberals. They're hipster liberals. But this is why I hate labels, though, because labels are always co-opted and used to divide. Always. There is never a circumstance where labels are not used to just divide the shit out of people. And they're always co-opted. Nancy Pelosi calls herself a progressive. I mean, come on.
Oh, that label means nothing at this point.
Yes,
look at the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Like Congressional Progressive Caucus is like there's like 200 of them at practically, and they don't do shit. They don't do a damn thing. Like there's nothing.
And
that
their
they
voting
vote for
record is nothing anywhere remotely close to what I would consider progressive. And I don't even consider progressive that far left. Like progressive is like maybe a Bernie Sanders. Like he may qualify as like progressive, but he's really just kind of a centrist to me. But
globally,
he's globally for sure.
Like, it's not even a question. It's like these people are considered like center or center right in most countries. Like we are not. Like it's an embarrassment. We
That's a
consider
huge problem, actually. I think amongst the many problems of the Bernie Sanders quote unquote movement, dude convinced a lot of people that they're left when they're not.
He made that was actually part of why he failed as well. I think, like if he had framed himself as what he actually was, as sort of like an FDR style, like Democrat, essentially, like that's what he is. He's not like some radical, leftist or anything. I think he would have done better. I think he would have done better instead of always trying to use the language of like radical change. And
all of this is intentional. All of the rhetoric and the propaganda and the language, that's all been intentional. This it really does benefit them because he pulled leftism in this country to the right. Instead of, he's going to shift the party to the left. That's what he said, but the opposite happened. He pulled the leftist, which there isn't a lot of leftism in this country, legitimate leftism. It's just very rare. But he pulled whatever like left leaning we have in this country to the right. He convinced people that electoral politics was reasonable and that, there's he really and again he did some good things. Like people get mad because I rag on him all the time. I think he's a bona fide piece of shit. He straight up lied to millions of people and let them get fucked over twice and didn't say shit about it. That's not a good person. Somebody that calls Joe Biden a good friend, not a good person. He's a war criminal, asshole. Get better friends. That's gross to me.
No, it was one of the things that pissed me off the most about his campaign was that Joe Biden is my friend garbage. And you have folks like even Davis Rhoda, Breonna Joy Gray, who were pushing back on that from within the campaign at the time and saying like, you cannot play this game of like Joe Biden is my friend garbage, because he's not the friend of, poor. This dude is the 1994 crime bill guy, the friend of buddy of, segregationist, Strom Thurmond, like
he's a straight up racist.
The dude is straight up. And I covered like during the campaign, his commercials towards just his whole attitude towards Black people was like some of the most paternalistic and insulting, condescending.
Well, earlier you said that like the Biden rhetoric is different than Trump's. I disagree. I think it's the same rhetoric. I think the delivery is just different because Trump was an overt racist. Like he was like very proud and loud about it. And I think a lot of that was probably a bit for show. He's definitely a racist, but I think that he knows his audience and he was trying to rile them up. And so he would do it more than maybe, do you know what I'm saying? He's definitely a fucking racist though. But Joe Biden is a lot different. Like he's more of like, he's very casually racist. Like it's very obvious. But he's just more like, he just has no idea that he's even racist. And so it just comes out sounding like just normal conversation. And a lot of people, and when the media, covers for him and excuses him and, tries to, just crazy Uncle Joe, don't mind him. But he says casually racist stuff all the time. And look at the shit that he's doing. He hasn't done shit for the Black community. He hasn't done shit for, I mean, seriously, he's deporting the hell out of people. Like he's not, it's
deported
amazing.
More Haitians in his, so far than Trump deported in his, in an entire term. Yeah. So this idea and the way that, again, he has the opportunity every day to wake up. He could end, cash bail. He could deschedule marijuana so that we don't have all the,
he could let all the Black men who are serving time for weed related offenses out. Let them out, pay them some kind of a restitution. Weed is being legalized all over the place, and you're still going to have people in prison for that? What the fuck?
We're increasing funding to police. He hasn't closed down the private ICE detention centers. He did this, this performative measure of closing, private, ending, the private prisons, funding, but then turned around and, moved those prisoners to public prisons that have all, just their whole own host of issues. Meanwhile, you got like 70% of people in migrant detention centers being housed in private facilities. He doesn't do a damn thing for any of those people. This is the same guy that, people were willing to ignore his own past behaviors of, the way that he treated, again, the way that he speaks to Black people. Look at even somebody that's like generally like a Black liberal, like Charlemagne the God, who I can't stand. And that dude, like, you can't even be like that. That's a dude that's generally on your side, Joe Biden. Like, you could show some base, but that's where he was like, you ain't Black if you don't vote for Joe Biden.
That was amazing.
And it's just like if you watch the full interview, he was so hostile towards him. Even when Charlemagne tried to point out things like, hey, weren't you responsible for that 1986 crime bill that, did the mandatory minimums and the 100-to-1 rule, crack versus cocaine? Like, wasn't that you on that? And he said, and he tried to argue against it. It was just bullshit. But he also, he had that phone call with the civil rights leaders, the Zoom call that leaked, where he was totally hostile to them, even when they suggested, like, hey, here's some steps that you could take through executive order. You don't need an act of Congress. Here's a bunch of steps that you could take, really mild reforms, like stuff that is like, to me, is like what are we talking? Like, it was some of the most basic, bare minimum, mild reforms. And he was unwilling to even, to negotiate even on those sorts of terms. And so he's done nothing. Look around and ask yourself, Black folks, like, how has your life improved under Joe Biden versus Donald Trump? And he's, and people have said, like, oh, look at even the misogynist angle as well. It's like the dude is credibly accused of rape, and we just have completely, like, nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it. It's like, and I'm sorry if I get your, YouTube algorithm.
Do not ever apologize for that. It's not something I even give a shit about.
Yeah, it's like Tara Reid, she just like, look at how the Me Too movement treated her and just, cast aside, because it's about which political party do you represent. And we're willing to completely ignore whole ass, beyond red flags. Like, what the hell? These are like, flashing red lights. Like, these are glaring issues here. And people have been so willing to cast that aside because it's like, oh, it's the same tribe as me. It's the Democratic Party.
Yes. Well, and, let's forget Tara Reid for a second either. And I believe Tara Reid 100%. I'm not saying like forget, but let's just, okay, fine. You don't want to believe Tara Reid. We have video evidence of this man being at best physically inappropriate with children. Children.
The creepy
physically
Uncle Joe
inappropriate.
shit,
yes. He's like groping. And listen, I think that at least for me, at least for me, and I'm sure that a lot of women feel the same way, but it makes me incredibly uncomfortable to watch those videos because I've been that little girl who some creepy old dude thinks that he can touch me. And it's not okay. Those videos are not okay. His behavior is not okay. And I don't know why that wasn't made a bigger deal, because that's video evidence. That's not like Tara Reid accusing him of something, which again, I believe Tara Reid. But I don't know how that...
Yeah, like, how do we pass by the literal things that we can see with our own two eyes?
Right.
Like, are you going to believe me or are you going to believe your lying eyes kind of thing? Right. Like, it's like look right at the evidence we have, and not just like we've seen him, with even grown women in touching them inappropriately. Yes. And he's credibly accused again by a Nevada politician, Lucy Flores, credibly accused of going up to her, just approaching her, stepping behind her in her space, leaning in, kissing her on the back of her head and sniffing her hair. Like, that is at a political event that she was, before she walked on stage. Like, I'm sorry, but these are, there were 7 credible accusations against him before we even got through the primaries, and those were all public. And this has been, and again, like you said, the video and the picture evidence has existed for decades at this point, and there's been articles written in like Vice and other outlets about this, about the fact that he's known as Creepy Uncle Joe, and he's got this. It's like the Washington.
Just the other day, he said to a 6-year-old, "Oh, you look like a 19-year-old. I like the breadths in your hair. Look at you with your legs crossed like a little lady." Like, that's so not okay.
Creepy. That's so fucking creepy. Like, even when he talked about George Floyd's daughter, like saying that he, like, oh, she came,
gave her some ice cream.
Sat on my lap.
Oh.
Yo, that's so creepy. And the story of the kids like rubbing his legs in the pool, like
this leg hair. Oh my god,
I'm fucking creeped out. Like, it's so gross. It's so gross. It is
like, so gross. It's not, and that man's president. That man is president of the United States. Like, your system is broken if that man is president. If your two choices in your election is Donald Trump and Joe Biden, you need to blow your system up and start over. It's done.
Absolutely.
That's over. That's a failure. I mean,
and this is an important thing to like, and that's why like dual power is something that I advocate for so much, because when we have to think about on the left too, when we blow those systems up, because I want to tear down those systems, and I absolutely do. And we have to think about what we're going to build up in this place, because we have to, and that's what dual power is all about, is about building up those systems right now, like starting right now today, and start to build up these systems so that we can, because this system is coming crumbling down, whether we tear it down or not, it's tearing itself down. Like capitalism is crumbling around us. Just look at the accelerating rate of economic crashes that we didn't even recover from 2008, and we already just hit, this 2020 COVID crash, or whatever they're calling it. They always name it something nice, like the housing crisis or the COVID crash, but it's always capitalism. It's just these every 4 to 7 years under capitalism. Anywhere it has existed for the last 200 to 300 years, every 4 to 7 year average, there's an economic downturn. And so they call it the business cycle, or the boom bust cycle, or a recession, or a depression. They have all kinds of nice names for it, but because they don't want to just call it what the hell it is, which is
fucking failure.
Capitalism failing. Exactly.
Yeah,
and so
doesn't work.
It's like, we got to start. And that's why I'm like, I talk about, like, even in left media, I think that we got to start to think about how we're going to structure media differently than, what is out there and existing right now, because we're still going to end up in the same sort of capitalist, broken systems where we're essentially competing. Exactly. We end up competing against one another instead of cooperating with one another.
That's why I try really hard to not do that. Honest to God, I really do. I make a concerted effort to keep my ego in check. And I don't really consider I'm not a journalist. I say that all the time. I'm not a journalist. I am. And again, Fee's going to make fun of me. I can already hear them mocking me. I'm just some chick from Ohio. That's it. Like, I'm some chick in Ohio who has a webcam and some cool friends. That's really it. Yeah. I don't know why people care about what I think. You shouldn't. I'm going to talk about stuff anyways, because it matters to me and I like doing it. But you need to do your own stuff and figure out your own stuff. But that's why I'm so huge about supporting independent media. We need it now more than ever. It is. Yes. If we lose it, again, this is why I focus so much on press freedom and free speech and all of that stuff, because it impacts everything else, literally everything else. Narrative control and the fight against propaganda. If you cannot talk about things in a real way and put out legitimate information and have that seen by people, and be able to have conversations and talk about things, and you're never going to win anything. They control and they're trying to essentially claim global jurisdiction over information at this point. The United States of America, basically the United States of America, the Five Eyes, they are trying to claim global jurisdiction over information right now. That's what Julian Assange is about. That's what all of these attacks, you see them all over the place, attacks across the globe, attacks on media and journalists. You see it in the United States. Look at the way journalists are treated at protests. They're photographed and their names are entered into some app where they're going to be tracked, and they have to show their IDs, and they're hit with rubber bullets and tear gas, and they're detained, and they're shoved down, and this is insane.
Look, we just supported we are actively supporting a government that just blew up a
major media building,
a major press building,
housing two major outlets.
Exactly. And was just like, oh, there was some Hamas, look at this cool graphic we have, and we'll draw red lines
everywhere.
Around it. Hamas is there,
everywhere.
And then, boom,
it's like Russia.
But nobody, but the same people that were saying Trump is so evil, and
he was mean to Jim Acosta.
Exactly. They have nothing to say about, the Israeli government just bombing a press building in Gaza. Like, that's absurd. And they do this.
That's a war crime. They did it on TV. Well, not on TV, because I don't know if they really covered it on TV, but we saw it on video. It's like a war crime on video.
There's a great video of one of the the members of the press from that worked in that building talking to a member of the Israeli government, trying to plead with them to not blow up the building before they just went in there and got their camera equipment. They're like, there's no Hamas, there's no people, no weapons in this building. We literally just need to get our camera equipment and all the files that we've saved.
It's super expensive stuff. Can we please go get a,
exactly. And they're like, people were literally in the middle of a live, like press conference at the time in the building. And when we got the alert that y'all gonna blow this building up, and it's like, can we please just go back in? And this guy is trying to argue with them, and they're just like, nope. And then 10 minutes later, that building was coming down. And it's just like, so, and this is one of the great things about the social media that I think it has allowed, and part of why I think the conversation shifting a little bit, at least particularly on the left. I think that there's no more of this like equivocating with Israel and Palestine anymore. No more like Israel has a right to defend itself. People recognize it as settler colonialism. They recognize it for what it is, and they reject it. And I think that one of the things that has allowed that is, like you said, most of the time in our mainstream media and in corporate media, you don't get to see all the destruction that's wrought by U.S. imperialism and our support of things like the Israeli government and their settler colonialism. But now through social media, people are getting access to that information. They're trying to stop it and to control it in every way, shape, or form. They want to turn these platforms like YouTube into something akin to cable media. You can see it through YouTube doing with their algorithm and through advertising. They try as hard as they can to essentially, in through YouTube TV and things like that, to try to, mimic what corporate media is at this point. But they're through social media, we've been able to access information and knowledge in a way that we weren't necessarily able to before. And so I think that that's part of why we're people are able to sort of have this solidarity with folks all around the world in a way that we weren't before.
Which is hugely important. And we have to stop handing that over, because right now we're handing that over. Stop cheering on censorship. For the love of fucking God, stop cheering on censorship. It will always come for you. Always, 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 especially on the left. And it pisses me off because it's not like we don't have historical reference for this. This is what always fucking happens. Always. Like this is how they go after somebody like an Alex Jones because he's universally despised, and it's manufacturing consent. Again, they just chip away at it little by little. And that's what they've been doing to the First Amendment over the course of decades. But I say all the time that over the past 10 or 15 years, it has ramped up exponentially. I mean, Barack Obama arrested more journalists and whistleblowers than all other presidents combined. Yep. He tortured Chelsea Manning. He had the secret indictment against Julian Assange. Like he harassed Jim Risen and tried to get him to turn over sources and threatened him with jail time. I mean, it has been ramped up exponentially, and it's only getting worse. And then they used Donald Trump to arrest Julian Assange because Barack Obama's too worried about his legacy. Fuck you and your legacy, war criminal. Obviously they don't want a Democrat to have to do it. The Republicans always heal the bad guy. George W. Bush did all the terrible stuff and the tax cuts and the wars and all that. Barack Obama did too, but he was charismatic, so he got away with it. But seriously, and it's just been, and now Joe Biden, who's supposed to be a Democrat, he's on a regular basis talked about how crucial press freedom is to democracy. But he won't do anything about Julian Assange. They're continuing these crazy attacks on media and on journalism, and everybody was pissed off. Donald Trump said a mean thing to Jim Acosta. Fuck Jim Acosta. He's a paid propagandist piece of shit. I don't give a shit that Donald Trump called him a name. I don't care. What I care about is that an award-winning journalist who exposed literal war crimes, who has exposed more corruption and criminality than all other journalists combined, period. And that's not just governmental, that's corporative or corporations. He's broken more story. Seriously. And I am not like a fangirl. I'm not obsessed with Julian Assange, but there's absolutely no denying
it's a basic just fact of just an objective fact that he exposed. Yes. That's what he's been charged with, as far as
that's what he does.
This isn't about people, and that's what they used the cover of under Donald Trump. They used the cover of, well, this was the guy who exposed Democratic National Committee, the DNC emails, and what they do is they manage to get the left wing, or not, sorry, excuse me, not left wing, the Democratic Party and, loyalists and liberals to support something like imprisoning, these sort of anti-free speech, anti-liberal, measures like jailing a journalist for simply exposing U.S. war crimes, but they do that under the guise of oh, well, that's the guy that did the WikiLeaks against Hillary Clinton and hurt Hillary Clinton and helped get Trump elected,
even though that has nothing to do with what he's been charged with.
Exactly.
2016 has nothing to do with it, fam. Not a damn thing. He's being charged with the Manning leaks, not the DNC leaks. You're right. They use that. Listen, if anybody is genuinely interested in how propaganda works, I highly encourage you. And if you're like a big nerdy researcher like I am, go back and look at the decade-long smear campaign that's been launched against one person, Julian Assange, because it's fascinating. I mean, it's terrifying, but it's also extremely fascinating because it really is. It was very well orchestrated. It was very and it continues to be very strategic. Like seriously, they're very good at what they do, and it's a problem. Like we're really behind on all of this. Like it's very manipulative.
Yep.
It's just the coverage was it's insanely you're right, and they've never gotten it wrong ever.
Exactly. No,
show me another
just publishing factual source
documentation. That's it.
You can't. What is the role of journalism if not to expose that? And it shouldn't be, oh well, whose team is he exposing information on? If it's
doesn't matter
that he's exposing, then I don't care. I'll take the information. And what they do at WikiLeaks is it's mundane in a way. It's like they just release the information and then they make it easily searchable. That's it.
Right?
And they say you go and you do whatever you want with this information. Yeah. They don't try to.
That's invaluable.
Or anything like that.
Yeah. There's no conjecture. There's no opinion. There's no. And again, like Julian Assange would do interviews and he would be asked about certain things and he would give his opinion. But that's separate from what they actually. Yes, that's separate from what they publish. What they publish is just source documentation. There is no there's no drama, there's no added narrative, there's none of that stuff. It's just information, and you can just look at it, evaluate it, and do with it what you will. And that, to me, that's invaluable. I mean, it really. And he is exposed again, just the war crimes alone. And actually, I remember we may have like a little fight here, not really, but I remember seeing I think it was the show that you did with like Sabby and Unapologetic, but you said something about when people fight for Assange, it's still centering whiteness, which I get where you're coming from, but I do want to push back just a little bit and maybe have you think about it maybe a little bit of a different way. Because for me, I look at it from an anti-imperialist perspective, and all of the crimes that he has exposed against Black and brown people across the globe, to me, is one of the biggest things. Yes, he is a white man, and I think that that's, a valid thing to say. But for me, and I think for a lot of Julian Assange supporters, it's really the anti-imperialist aspect of it, and all of the things that he's exposed. I just wanted to like bring that up and have you like maybe think about it in that way too.
Yeah, no, I don't think that I don't think that you're the kind of person that I'm aiming at with that necessarily. Right. That kind of comment.
And it's a valid criticism, legitimately. Yeah, it really is.
Really, what I'm talking about in that is just to say that when all that someone is discussing, when that becomes the only issue of discussion, then to folks in the Black community, it's not, when your problems are so directly in front of you, and it's literally just this feeling of, I feel danger every time I walk outside of my home. I'm just trying to get to the corner store and back without getting murdered by cops or, some, white supremacists, what they did to Ahmaud Arbery. These are just, some of them were ex-cop, one of them was an ex-cop, but it's like, people literally just trying to survive, just trying to put food on the table, feel constantly under attack by a system. And that's not part of the issues that are under discussion on a platform. And and that's pretty much it. That's the main issue that I was taking, was just when that's sort of the focus of the coverage, and it's not to talk about how Black people have no media outlet and no we're constantly censored and shut down and through multiple systems. It's not just through the algorithms and things like that, and the fact that we just don't have, we're only accepted into media if we have a very specific narrow opinion. On Fox News, it has to be pretty much anti-Blackness. On MSNBC, it has to be only narrowly focused on social justice, not focusing on economics in any way. And as long as you're sort of that kind of character, then they'll let you on in those spaces. But so on the left, you have some folks that and I don't want to I don't want to caricature people. I'm really, and more I'm trying to move away from even criticizing folks in this way, because I don't I'm not a media critic professionally and don't spend enough time, it can be sort of manufactured. My own consent can be manufactured in a way when algorithms naturally elevate certain things
nobody's immune.
into my. Exactly. And so it's some of it is just being in a sort of bubble on the left where some, it seems, will focus on that issue, but there's so many other issues. And to me, it's more of just like, okay, I see the problem with that. Like, what are we doing to counteract that, with our own, how are we building power on the left to make sure that we don't fall victim to that same thing, and focusing on that issue, which is, to me, that's what I talk about, the idea of like building an independent left media collective, because I think, we always talk on the left about how like labor power is the only power that we have left. And it's like, I worry that if we all go off and do these like independent podcasts that are all separate and isolated without working together more collectively and more cooperatively, then we also miss out on a chance. We can talk about power and labor power, but we're not actually ever going to possess it until we start to work together cooperatively and collectively, and focus in on these issues that sort of are more controlled with but I'm a free Assange, like I am pro Julian Assange, free Assange. I've supported anytime I can, and I talk about him. I talk about him in passing on my show for sure. I haven't done any like total pieces because my time is super limited, and I'm housing insecure, and I'm struggling, and I don't have.
Not everybody can obsess about it.
Yeah, exactly. Like I've been unemployed for 2 years. This is important work that needs to be done. Of course, I just think that people also need to give space to what you're doing right here, letting somebody like myself on, and having Black leftists on, and Black socialists in particular on, to talk about these issues, and to give space to that as well. I think that that's the important thing, is just not closing down in a way that we're only focused on these issues. I think that we need all of it. I want a multi-pronged, all of the above kind of approach, where we're both focused on anti-imperialism, because we must be focused on that, but also focused on these really crucial domestic issues, because just for the simple fact of realizing that in order to pull more people in on the left, the kinds of people that I think we want to have on our side, which are people that agree with us passively, but they've sort of disengaged from politics because politics has screwed them over and it isn't working for them. And so they've disengaged from it. And in order to re-engage those people and to bring them back in, I think to do that work requires us talking about issues that are important to those people's lives, because they're so abstracted away from an issue like Julian Assange and even like freedom of the press issues, because a lot of these people aren't even watching.
It doesn't hit you in the face. It doesn't hit you. You're right.
Exactly.
I mean,
but when you talk about housing and housing security, and you talk about that, or Medicare and healthcare, and for these people, it is like that's something that is visceral to them. Exactly. And that's why even workplace democracy, that's something that I feel like is visceral to people in a way where it's like, no, this can change your life tomorrow. We can start changing your life like right now, today, in a massive substantive way, in a way that actually fundamentally changes the system, so that we can gain enough power to prevent ever another Julian Assange from happening. But I think in order to do that, we need to gain political power in order to gain political power for the sole purpose of dismantling political power, like not for the sake of having political power.
Right.
Exactly. And in order to do so, I just think that we have to bring some people into the fold that they're hurting so much, and that we have to figure out a way to help these people understand, yes, we need to be anti-imperialist. We need to support freedom of speech and fight ferociously for freedom of the press and freedom of speech. And what's happening to Julian Assange is essentially a crime against humanity, for what they're doing to him. And to talk about all those issues, and to just make sure that we don't get too laser focused on any one of these issues, because they all, are important to people's lives. And we have to do the work of helping people to understand more why Julian Assange is so crucial to their lives.
Well, that's why I get frustrated with myself, because I can't find the right words to make people understand how important it is and how it does impact everything else. Like your housing, it affects your housing, it affects your healthcare, it affects everything. Because again, and I use healthcare as an example all the time, because we have like a whistleblower who proved the point. Wendell, I think it's Potter or Porter. I never remember his name is, and I'm really sorry, dude, out there, whoever.
Wendell Potter.
Sorry. Thank you.
Wendell Potter.
I'm really bad at names, and Porter and Potter, for whatever reason.
Understandable.
But he used to write propaganda for the health insurance companies, and he misled people, the American populace, about the Canadian healthcare system. And that's a perfect example of why what's happening to Julian Assange impacts everything, because right now they're trying to assert jurisdiction over all information. And so how are you going to fight for an issue that you care about if you cannot put out information in support of your position? You cannot, like, that's not a thing that you can do. And so it's really hard because you're right. It is such an abstract concept because it's not in everybody's face every day. People don't notice the fact that they're losing their First Amendment rights. Like, you're barely hanging on to it by a thread. I mean, there's like 71 anti-protest bills right now across the country. There are 4 in my state alone. So, I mean, and that's all, it's all interconnected. And so it's just really frustrating that I can't find the right words because it really is. And we're so close to losing it. We really are. Like, we're so close to losing it. And so that's really frustrating that I can't find the right words.
In many ways, we already have lost a lot of it. In many ways, I mean, the fact that literally the country that, is supposed to be a bastion of democracy is currently the one that is prosecuting a journalist for doing journalism should be, the sign for all of us of, of what's to come, and really make it as poignant as it needs to be, that this is a crucial, critical issue to all of our lives. Like you said, it's press freedom it's why it's in the First Amendment. It's like that was the first thing you think of when you're like, what do you need to have a free society? It's like, oh, that's an important one right there.
Well, that's why the smear campaign has been it really is like, that's a crucial piece of it, because they've managed to dehumanize Julian Assange and create like this like caricature of like a comic book villain or something. And most people, I usually get 2 different kinds of people, either people who have never really heard of him, or maybe they've like vaguely heard the name, or they're like, oh yeah, it's, something like that, or people who are just grossly misinformed. He's a Russian, he's a rapist, he's a hacker, he's a this, he's a that, he smears dog or cat poop or whatever, he's smelly, he's an asshole. Like, there's all these smears that they've used against him over the course of more than a decade now, and it's been very effective. And so either people have no idea who he is because our media doesn't cover it, our mainstream, which is amazing to me. This is like a vital, crucial, historic court case on press freedom, and nobody's covering it. That's a story. Like, if you're in the news business and you're not covering that, you should ask yourself why. To me, that's so blatantly weird and creepy that this massive court case is going on, where the United States is trying to extradite an Australian journalist who had dual Ecuadorian citizenship to the United States of America, where he's never lived. He's not from. WikiLeaks is not a United States-based corporation, but they want to charge him under our laws, and they want to extradite him from the UK. It's like, but like, nobody's covering that. When did we become
the world police? It's just like, this is, like, exactly. But that's how we have operated for literally as long as we've been, once the British Empire fell and under the U.S. Empire, this is what, they take on the role of the world police. And so that's why folks that are, you see the defund the police and we need to defund and defund and demilitarize our police, but we also need to defund our military, and we need to, because we need to resist U.S. empire from within the U.S. empire, because it allows for things like this to take place, where we are seen and accepted as the top cops in the world, and we're allowed to just go around, without any sort of accountability and do things like prosecute journalists for literally doing their jobs. And so if they want to, prosecute Julian Assange on these other, whatever, they could do that, like if they wanted to prosecute him on the rape charges, which, I mean, I've from what I understand of the story, and I've read the story, it's like, listen, if that's what, if they want to pursue that, they saw there was a good piece on, I think it was on the Old Useful Idiots podcast when it was on Rolling Stone, and they had on a lawyer on there who has been like covering the Julian Assange case forever, and she talked about the actual charges, and I mean, to me, honestly, it's like I don't need to go into all of it, but it's like, supposedly he had sex with a woman while she was asleep or whatever, and didn't use a condom, and the actual rape charges for the not using of a condom, which is against the law in in whatever country that took place in. And listen, if you want to prosecute him on that shit, like go ahead and go do that. That happened like over a decade ago, and you would think that if you actually wanted to prosecute that and were serious about prosecuting that, you would do so when that information was fresh in the victim's mind, and not 10 plus years after, when they finally decided to like extradite him and whatever the case was in the UK or wherever the hell they extradited him to. And so to me, it's like, all right, well, that seems like a terrible way if you really believe that somebody committed this crime and is guilty of this crime, and you want to protect the victims of sexual violence. It seems like a weird way to do it by waiting over 10 years and not prosecuting the case, and then trying to do it under the guise of under this rape case when it's really about this
it's not about the rape thing. Rape is a political weapon, and when somebody like Julian Assange, who has made enemies of the most powerful people on earth, is accused of rape, and listen, I'm going to get so much heat for this, but I'm not a believe all women person, because I remember in the 2016 primary there were Hillary Clinton supporters who were talking about potentially accusing Bernie Sanders of touching them inappropriately. It's not like that's not a weapon that we see that's used. I mean, all the
Bernie
time.
was smeared as a secret sexist by Elizabeth Warren. Like in the last, you had Madeleine Albright, war criminal Madeleine Albright, saying that there's a special place in hell for women that don't support other women. Like, I'm not going to, the people that use that weaponize, identity politics in that way. I don't think that there's anything wrong inherently with actual identity politics. I mean, nobody does identity politics better than the Republican Party, which is a practically all white party. So the folks that are that claim to be against identity politics are often the ones that are using it most vociferously. But when they weaponize identity politics in this way, it is absolutely insidious, and it's used to just again mask the crimes that both parties and the corporations are committing here domestically and all around the world. And we have to, we can't allow that to happen. So when they use this believe all women, that's dangerous. Exactly. That's not a reasonable thing to say, because, that's like, believe Kamala Harris.
That's a very serious accusation. And I would want some evidence for that. Like, that's a very easy thing to just accuse somebody of, especially if you're in a position such as Julian Assange or even Joe Biden. Like, when Tara Reade first came out, like, I didn't I automatically believe her. No, I examined the situation. I listened to her story. I listened to her. Katie Halper did an amazing interview with her. I'm not usually a fan of Katie Halper's, but that was a great interview. And I just know it's not that I don't like her. It's just, I just don't listen to her. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, it's not that I don't like her.
Exactly. Yeah.
I can't listen to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Same.
But and just knowing, like, looking at Joe Biden and his past history and all of that stuff, that's why I believe Tara Reade, because I believe she's credible. But it's absolutely possible that charges. Look at what happened to Shahid Buttar. He was accused, you know what I'm saying? Like, that was bullshit. So and
I'm hoping to have Shahid on the he actually just called me randomly like the other day, because he was like, checking in with like past supporters of his thing, and he called me up while I was just like out, the other day, and I was just like, hey, we should hope to have him on, I invited him on the podcast. He's so and he accepted.
Like, exactly. I'm not I don't like politicians.
Exactly same. But and that was when I was still trying to, have some, like, still caught up in the electoralism and such. But I talked to him about the fact that even on the phone call, I was like, listen, the left is, getting this, in seeping sense of nihilism and, cynicism towards electoral politics. And I think it's reasonably so. And like, wanting to have a discussion about that. But absolutely. And when that happened with Shahid Buttar or Alex Morse, you can find videos on my channel of me coming out immediately in the wake of that and giving it the same treatment that I gave to, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Like, I believe that Donald Trump raped women. I believe that he raped his own wife. Like, there's, on court deposition, he dragged her by her hair and dragged her all around the house. And the only legal, like, place that she could be charged with perjury, she said that. Like, I believe that in that situation. Like, that sounds credible to me. Also, what sounds credible, like you said, what Joe Biden is accused of by Tara Reade, it sounds credible. She talked about it contemporaneously. You can see video of her mother calling into Larry King Live and talking about her, a daughter from that town who was, sexually harassed and assaulted by a powerful person in the government. And so, yes, that you add up all of it and you take it on a case-by-case basis, of course. And I think, the general sentiment, don't it reflexively not believe women is a
no,
good,
and
like,
I would never
message,
attack
it's
somebody who is making an accusation. Like I would never be like, oh my God, no. But like when somebody comes out with an accusation, I'm not going to go one way or the other. I want to look at the like the evidence. I want to like
totally
listen to the stories. I want to listen to the person who has been accused if they have like a rebuttal. Like I'm not going to make like a snap judgment on something like that and just quote believe all women. That's super dangerous.
We're creating
to have
a
that
really
mindset.
scary, exactly. That's creating a very scary place where, and that's very, there's a lot of like authoritarian like tendencies that have to be involved in something like that, where you're like, okay, well, one person says something, and then without any, investigation or evidence, we just accept that. That's, unreasonable. But, in a lot of these cases, there's not going to be like a smoking gun kind of situation. But like you said, you can take like what happened to Cuomo. It's like, with Andrew Cuomo, it's like you can look at that and see and look at the evidence, look at the, the base, how many accusations are coming out here and from these set of people,
I believe
and
them.
What's their credibility. And I believe it. And I'm just, and we could take that on a case by case basis and not be unreasonable. But there's an inconsistency with some people who believe, believed, what's her name, against Brett Kavanaugh,
Christine Blasey Ford.
Christine Blasey Ford, they believe her, but then they don't believe Tara Reid, and there's an inconsistency there. When these
Alyssa
people
Milano.
are both critical. Exactly, folks like Alyssa
gross.
Milano and these celebrities, and that's why I can't stand celebrity culture, and we should resist it at all costs on the left, because elevating these celebrities like there's no reason.
I think that they've taken a huge hit. So the celebrity culture, I think, has taken a huge hit. I think COVID did a number on it. We like people weren't like going out to see movies as much and stuff like that. But also just celebrities decided to like make it their mission to make everybody hate them. Like they were just doing the most cringe-worthy things. Like when they did the video of Imagine, and people were just calling him out left and right. And so that gave me hope, because I feel like celebrity culture is kind of dying off a little bit to some degree. I'm hoping that we've seen like the height of that ridiculousness, like being obsessed over like which Kardashian is starting a new makeup line. Like I don't give a fuck. Like I do not care. I mean, and I get that, and I'm not like criticizing people who enjoy like that kind of I mean, this is going to sound very snarky, but mindless entertainment, because they're like, listen, I'm not immune to like enjoying like a shitty reality show every once in a while. And like, but that's to obsess over it, and to like the whole celebrity culture and the like celebrity worship, that aspect of it is really, really bizarre. And it's dangerous. I mean, honestly, we like elevate these people who are just people. Like they're just normal people, and you like put them on this pedestal. And I mean, not only is it unhealthy for the person who's doing that, but it's unhealthy for the person you're putting on a pedestal. That's an immense amount of pressure to have to live up to like be perfect, like a role model. Like it's ridiculous.
And we talk about power imbalances all the time on the left, and it's like we create these massive, celebrity culture like gives power to the celebrity in a way that none of us. I don't want anybody to have this kind of power over other people. And you see it through like parasocial relationships, and where people, they feel like they know a celebrity that doesn't really know them. And that creates this whole power imbalance. And it's just like, we got to try to resist that at all costs and not allow anyone. None of us are beyond reproach. We should all be criticized.
Yes.
Even every media entity, you should have a nice healthy media diet, where you consume a lot of different types of media, and you develop
including
a media
those
literacy.
You disagree with.
Yes, absolutely.
Read some shit you don't agree with.
Absolutely.
It's okay to do that, you guys.
That's the only way you can develop knowledge, right? Is to like, you have to see something that you're at least unaware of at the very least, like be willing to listen to perspectives that you're simply unaware of at the very least, and be critical of those, of course, be very, very critical, but you gotta do the work. And there's, of course, I don't want to like sound like elitist in this way of like telling every like poor struggling person, like, you got to go do the work. People deserve to have a basic level of media that is like not lying to them constantly all the time to do the work of like corporations. Like there should be a media like that. And we're trying to build that in like independent left media. I feel like is like, that's
people
part
get
of what we're trying to do
angry.
here.
Like, for example, with COVID, people get so angry at like people who don't trust the vaccines or people who don't want to wear masks or whatever. They have been lying. Really? How about you spend a little bit of time being mad at like the pharmaceutical companies and our government that have created such an environment of distrust that it's like
Exactly.
super difficult to like ever trust anything that they say. Like my jumping
Exactly.
off point is if the establishment or the government or the deep state, whoever, whatever you want to call it, if they say something, my jumping off point is they're lying, and okay, we'll go from there.
Work
Because
from there.
they lie
Exactly,
more
yeah.
than they tell the truth. Like we talked
Yeah.
about earlier, the media is complete propaganda. Your government is constantly lying to you. I mean, this is not like me making shit up. This is like a proven fact. We have just an unbelievable amount of evidence supporting that. So why are people not more angry at the fact that we don't have a media that actually informs us? It's complete and total propaganda. Like the fact that people don't know what's happening in Israel, the fact that nobody's talking about what's happening in Yemen, the fact that people still aren't talking about the fact that the United States is occupying a third of Syria. You know, what's happening in Africa, AFRICOM, all of this stuff that's happening that mainstream media never talks about, but we get to hear about what color Jill Biden's scrunchie is. Who gives a flying fuck? Like, who cares about the dog that pooped in the White House hallway? Nobody cares about that. And
we
like
can we can like watch like Biden doing speeches down in Tulsa, but like I'm learning about the history of Tulsa through a rando on Twitter who's like posting about the fact that, you know, Tulsa was actually it wasn't like this like black capitalist haven and like, oh, a sign of like how black people can rise up and lift themselves up by the bootstraps even under a capitalist system. It's like actually there were like those were like Afro-Indigenous peoples that had been granted land from the, you know, from the US government. It's really a case study in what is possible through things like, you know, land redistribution to, you know, disaffected communities and, you know, in the actual people when we give land and resources back to people and allow them to, you know, self-determine really what is possible. And so, but we, you know, they even nowadays, even in most of the coverage of Tulsa in the, you know, that we even hear about now, most of the history that which has been just completely whitewashed and disappeared. Even when we hear about it now, it's often through the framing of this like Black Wall Street, which is, you know, they call it the Black Wall Street, and it's, you know, it's supposed to give us this like black capitalism. Exactly. And it's all propaganda. It's really connected to, you know, African people that were owned by indigenous tribes who were granted land by the government. It wasn't a reparations, but it was, you know, some land redistribution and the ability to simply self-determine and within their local communities. And it should be a story of that. But instead we get Joe Biden, who will come out here and use it for whatever propaganda he can. Man, yeah, like I said, even during the campaign, some of Joe Biden's videos were like some of the most like paternalistic, just condescending shit to black people, where it's just like, you know, nothing about what he was going to do to help anybody. And even when like Ice Cube tried to like come and do like a black agenda, and he said he was willing to talk to whoever, Trump or, you know, Biden before the election, like everybody got on him. Nobody talked about the actual black agenda that he had worked on with this great black academic and scholar and economist, Derek Hamilton, who, you know, Dr. Derek Hamilton, you know, these ideas were actually, you know, fundamental changes to, you know, systemic changes that would improve black communities. And Joe Biden was allowed to, you know, people were laughing and making fun of Ice Cube because he was working with Trump, you know, because he was willing to sit down with Trump when Biden turned around and was like, I'm not even going to talk to you till after the election. Like, don't even, you know, and but that's somehow seen as like obscene or wrong. And
I still can't believe Ice Cube got shit for that, to be honest with you. It pisses me off. And I realize I really don't have any place to speak about this. I'm a white woman. I understand that. But it kind of goes back to like the white people telling black people who they can and can't organize with or who they can and can't talk to. It's really gross to me. You know, Ice Cube saying, hey, these are the two people running for president. I would like to speak to both of you about black issues. If Trump takes him up on that, he would be an idiot to turn that down. Even if you can't trust Trump, which you cannot trust Trump, you still take that opportunity. No, you can't but you take that opportunity and you do what you can. If you're Ice Cube and you have a platform and you have the opportunity to get the attention of Donald Trump and have him at least listen to what you have to say, and put pressure on him publicly, that you should absolutely do that. And it's just this weird thing where people, you just can't talk to people that you don't agree with, even if they agree with you on the thing that you're trying to get done. Because I want to get stuff done. And if that means that on a certain issue, I have to work with somebody, or not even work with somebody, but just like, oh, okay, on this thing, doing work like together with somebody that maybe I don't always agree with, I don't give a shit because I just want the thing done. I just want to get the
and
thing
it's like,
done.
you don't even have to like we don't even have to work with these people
No.
in the way that they're describing. It's like, if we happen to align on an issue, then we will naturally come together on this
People
issue.
act like having a conversation with somebody or like just talking, like discussing an issue that you agree on means that like you're glued at the hip, best friends, allies, like partners in crime, battle buddies. No, it just means that you're having a conversation about an issue that you both agree on and care about and want to get done. And you get shit done that way. Why is that so controversial?
Like, I'm down to work with the liberals on like their social justice issues where like I know that I agree with them on and stuff. And I want to work with leftists and socialists on things like economic issues where where we agree on that. And it's like, that's my, my lane. And it's like, I'll work with you over here on an issue that I think that we can, if we happen to agree on like something like, ending cash bail or police abolition or prison abolition. Like, if we happen to agree on that, then that means that you organize all your people, we'll organize all of our people, and when the vote happens or whatever the action that has to happen, we'll all be there, and it's
we
not
need
like
the numbers. You need numbers.
Exactly. And when that ends, we can go back and start fighting for whatever the hell we happen to fight for, or whatever. And so I reject that notion of like, oh, we can't, now we should, it's not like we can work with any and everybody and actually like, there's some people that are actively working against our end goals that we have to be careful of and be like,
there are people on the left who are working against our goals. You know what I'm saying? So to me, it's just, are you an honest actor? Are you an honest actor? Do I feel like you're coming at me in an honest way? And if you are, then I can probably work with you. Now, if you are like a literal Nazi, we're probably not going to work. Like we're not going to have a lot in common to work on probably. But what's frustrating to me is that there's a lot of space between Bernie Sanders and literal Nazis. There's a lot of people in there that we could be talking to that generally agree with us. Like, what is it? Like 54% of Republicans agree with Medicare for all. Are you just going to like dismiss those people because they voted for Trump, even though that they agree with you on Medicare for all and we could potentially help each other get that done? Because I would like to get that done. I would like people to stop dying from lack of healthcare. That would be swell. In the richest country in the history of the world in the year 2021, people should not die from lack of healthcare. So if that means that I have to work with some Trump voters on getting Medicare for all and like enough public pressure to get that done, I'm going to fucking do that because I really want to get that thing done. It's important to me. And I don't give a shit what that, like, I don't have, there's no purity there. There's no, like, are we going to agree on everything? No, like, for example, Spike Cohen's a libertarian. I disagree with Spike Cohen on a lot of things, but he's been doing a lot of really important work with Accountability Ohio here in Columbus on ending qualified immunity. I agree with him on that issue. So I would like to work with him on that issue and try to figure out how I can help his cause and how I can, because he's doing really great work with an organizing group in Central Ohio who's trying to make that happen. So I'll fucking work with him, and then we can argue about economics later.
Exactly, because we can still be critical. We're critical of liberals all the time. We happen to align with them on a few issues, and we will go and we end up voting on the same issues, or we'll be out there in the same, whatever protests or whatever the case is. I'm not going to kick them out and be like, oh, you're a liberal, I don't want to work with you on this, fighting for Black Lives Matter, essentially, and raising awareness of police brutality and trying to actually end, abolish police in prisons, essentially. And like, whoever wants to show up to that, it's like, I don't, if whatever you happen to identify as doesn't matter to me when we're there organizing, fighting on an actual issue that matters. And I think that too much of our lives, especially under COVID, it's pushed us so much online that online spaces become like where we're exactly. So we get stuck in these places where it's like people are. Exactly. We're so abstracted away from actual organizing and actually participating in, in any sort of, actions, direct action. I'm guilty of this myself of like not, I think that more direct action and grassroots organizing, local sustainability projects needs to be more of the focus. And it's, we gotta get, log off a little bit or start to organize across these boundaries as well, where we're like, hey, we're the online left, let's start to organize together. And even like what we're doing now, I'd see to some degree like the Fred Hampton leftists, like start to build build up structures where it's, we're starting to coordinate together in a democratic way. If we're really anti-capitalist, it has to be in a socialist and in a democratic way of saying, all right, we need worker, ownership over the means of production. How the hell do we actually enact that? Well, we're independent media. We need to start to have democratic workplaces in all of our media spaces. Like, we shouldn't be building up capitalist like enterprises and businesses where we're like the CEO
and
of
stop making it so damn competitive, you guys, and stop snarking at each other behind each other's backs and shit. It gets on my nerves. It really does. I don't have to, we're not all going to cover the same stuff. We're not all going to cover the same stuff in the same way. We're not all going to do the same show. We're not going to talk to the same people. We all have our own niche, and that's fine. Like, you don't have to, put your nose up in the air like you're better than somebody else because you covered something that somebody else didn't cover, or you don't have to do that. We should all give each other props when somebody does do like a really great job on a story, or maybe who's the only person who's been covering something that other people overlooked. Like, I try to do that all the time. I'm constantly trying to give props to independent media. I should probably do it more. Like, we can all do better. But like, I just don't have an ego about it. So, like, I'm part of the MCSC network, but I love Fran Hampton Leftist, and I love News Dive, and I love Left Voice, and I love, there's a lot of like, and even lefty media that I, is maybe just not my thing. Like, it's maybe just a little bit too status quo. Like Brianna Joy Gray. Like, I love Brianna Joy Gray. She's a little, I'm a lot probably to her left. And so, but I still like her, and I still I don't have any need to like tear her down, or I want to see her do well as long as she's doing good coverage. And, I want to see Gray Zone do stuff on Syria. I wish they'd give credit to Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett more. But I am okay with everybody. I want people to do great work because we need it. We need all of these voices. Everybody has their own voice and their own information that they're trying to get out there, and we should just support each other. Like, with Sabrina Sabby Sabs, women, like, we're trying to get women to stick together. Like, when I was first getting started, Caitlin Johnstone, Elizabeth Lee Voss, and Taylor Hudak were like three people that really were supportive, and who really encouraged me. And like, because like I said earlier, I don't know why anybody gives a shit what I have to say about anything. I just don't know. So they were like, it's really not about that. Like, if you just have something to say, just, say it. And so they were very encouraging. And so and you should try to pass that along, which Nico gets a ton of shit, and I get it. He's a very big personality, and he's not for everybody. I totally understand. But I will say one thing about Nico House. I happen to adore him, but he is one of the most generous people with his time and his resources. Like, he came on my show when I had like 300 followers or 300 subscribers. He didn't have to. He doesn't have to do that. He has a platform. He has, he's fine. But he reaches back. He did the same thing for Steve Poikonen on Slow News Day. He reaches back and he tries to bring people up with him. And he's, my friend Sam from News Dive Radio and Left Voice, I guess. He's fresh out of journalism school, and he's like trying to make it as an independent journalist. And so he reached out to a bunch of like big name content creators, and the only one that got back to him was Nico House. And so to me,
I think that Cornel West is like the shining example of somebody like that, who's able to, because of the way that he approaches things, he is somebody that is capable of talking to pretty much anyone. He can go on Joe Rogan podcast. He can go on, any lefty show. He can go on Fox News. Yeah. He can go on, and he's invited onto these places because he's able to do, to be diplomatic in a way, to not see everyone as, he's willing to have a conversation with people that he disagrees with. I recently read his book as part of a book club crossover that I did with the Vanguard podcast, and we did this book club crossover where we read Democracy Matters, and in a part of that book, towards the end of the book, he talks about how his original the first time that he left Harvard and under Larry Summers, and he talks about how Larry Summers invited him into his office and thought he was going to get Cornel West to shit on this conservative professor. And Cornel West was just like, listen, I know that just because me and that conservative don't agree on pretty much anything, he's like, we still hold, these debates and discussions that the community and the public see as vital and valuable. And he's willing to have a discussion with me in a way that it's not about, the ad hominem attacks and tearing each other down on a personal level. We're really out here to debate and discuss because you genuinely believe that what you're doing is the right thing in the best way for, if I believe somebody is at least arguing in good faith faith and
Yeah.
truly believes that that's their sincere belief, it's like, yes, we should be willing to hold conversations and hold discussion and so
Cornel West is really good at keeping it real. He was just on CNN, it might have been today, with Martin Luther King III, and they were trying, so I don't remember who it was, I think it was Jake Tapper, but they were trying so hard to get him to say something nice about Joe Biden. He just wasn't having any part of it. Like, he was just not, he was still diplomatic. He was Dr. Cornel West, but I
disagree with him on, like, he supported, he voted for Biden. I disagree with him on it, but I could have that conversation with Dr. West in a way that is, is respectful, and we can have some dialogue around it, and hopefully we walk away, better informed,
he's at least willing to listen,
Absolutely.
Like, when Nick just interviewed him, Nick did a great job, and Nick disagreed with him, and I was really proud of Nick, because I know that Cornel West is kind of like a hero to him, which maybe I'm overstepping. Yeah. I don't know, because I don't speak for Nick. I don't know if hero is the right word.
I know. I've watched Nick enough to know that he said on multiple occasions that Cornel West is like, one of his, the people.
I just hate the word hero, and I don't want to attribute it.
Exactly, because I just said it, and I don't mean it either. And really, it is the most respected, public intellectual for him and myself. It's the.
I think it's somebody that was really influential for him.
Exactly, and very influential over me.
And so I was really proud of him, because he challenged him a little bit on some things that they disagreed with, and I'm sure that that's not easy to do when you look up to somebody. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I've had to do it on my show a couple of times. Not really, because I don't think I've really interviewed somebody that like I really, really, really look up to like that. You know what I mean? Vanessa Beeley, but I mean, I didn't really have much to challenge her on, because I kind of agree with her on most things.
Exactly.
But
and that's why it's even harder sometimes to, like, take that point that might feel like a small fringe point, but it's like, but this is probably where there's actually value to our discussion, because it's not always so. It can be nice to talk to people that we agree with on 100% of things, but
I like to be challenged, though.
Exactly.
Make me think.
Absolutely.
And I think that you're right. We need more of that. And we do need more of like a collective, like an independent, because it would really strengthen numbers. They're coming for us, all of us. They already are. We're seeing it across the board. I mean, they demonetized Condo Couch and took away, we just talked to Pasta about this last night. It's like a third of their income. And I liken it to economic sanctions on independent media. They're trying to economically freeze people out of being able to do this. And it's really hard to even get started. I mean, I don't know, I guess, because I've never monetized. So I don't know how like difficult it is to like but I'm sure it's really hard to like start to get to a point where you can do a show. And like, I know a lot of people are trying to do it full time, and they're like really trying to like dive into it and really put everything that they have into it. And that's really hard when you have to fight against algorithms, and you have to fight against Patreon, and you have to fight against YouTube demonetizing you, or, there's like a multitude of ways that they come after independent media. And if we stick together, we can help each other, and we can like, when they come for one of us, we can all stand up together and fight back. And to me, that's super important. Like, I want to be able to do that, because I think, again, I'm worried about getting shit done. And so even if I don't agree with like an independent content creator on everything that they cover or the way that they cover it, if I feel like they're like an honest channel who's doing like decent, at least trying to do decent work, then I'm always going to fight for everybody's like right to free speech. And like, I'm always going to be against deplatforming and all of that stuff. So we need more of that. Like, we need more collaboration between independent media, because they're coming for all of us. Nobody's safe.
That's why it's such a vital, and even the channels and the platforms that we use right now are, may not always be there in the same way. These are capitalist institutions. They can at any point decide to change the algorithm on us. Patreon can change their funding, their revenue mechanisms and their expense mechanisms, and so we can end up paying more to those outlets. We really have to start to think about how we're going to build democratically controlled institutions and services
and platforms
platforms. Exactly. And that's, I really like the work of, I think that Black socialists in America are doing some really good work around this, with trying to develop technology that we're going to be able to use in a broader, on the broad sort of left spectrum, where it's building democratic technologies. Because how do we do things like have democracy, you know, have an actual functioning democracy, if we can't do things like hold basic votes in a, you know, remotely and online and in a safe and secure way? We're going to have to build up that technology, or, you know, because we can't just tear down the system. Like, that's not enough.
No.
I'm not supportive of just tearing down the system. If we just tear down the system, then, you know, we
That's
leave
gonna
a power vacuum. And,
well,
you know,
and not
question
only
is,
that,
who has
that
an
a lot
upper
of
hand in
people
a
will
power
suffer.
vacuum?
A lot of people
Exactly.
will suffer in that. We need to build something first.
Exactly. It's in the people that are going to suffer. It's the people that are going to succeed in a system. If we just tear down the government and destroy the government and that's it, then we just leave a power vacuum where essentially the people with the most money and power that
And
are,
resources,
you know, that are in resources, they will be in control. And we don't want that.
Again,
we know how that system, you know, we've already done that, and we don't want that to be our system. So we have to build the institutions up in its place. And I think, and that's what dual power is all about, is about building institutions up as these other ones are, as the current institutions are failing and crumbling around us. And we got to do that work, and it's hard work, it's long, it's arduous. You know, it's not as sexy as electoral politics, where you get the instant gratification, you cast your vote, and then a day later you know who won the election, even though, you know, none of us have been winning any of these elections in reality. So we're just like, we need to start. And I think that the Black socialists in America, I recommend people check out the work that they're doing. Just if there's any people that are technical and, you know, folks like that can lend a hand to they're hosting, you know, they're doing something tonight. They're doing an open session, a design session for their dual power app, where they're talking about, you know, they're building this application that's going to allow people to do things like vote and to see where other, you know, collectives and cooperative workplaces are being built, and how they structure that, and to provide support to people that want to build collective economies. And we all got to start to like figure out ways that we can contribute to those movements, so that we're not just like talking about it, but we're being about it ourselves, and like, and not just talking the talk, but walking the walk as well in independent media.
Oh, can we get some more of that, please?
Yes,
like, can we
stop
like obsessing over podcasters and do something?
Yeah,
I'm so tired of the people that just bitch. Like,
I know it becomes so focused on like the online drama, and not focusing on like the shit that's actually like moving the needle in people's lives every day. Exactly. Yeah. So we gotta like.
I mean, really, I'm more worried about what Ryan Knight tweets than I am about how Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez votes.
There's so many people that it's so painful to watch. It's like, and I've watched people who I've like followed, and their accounts have just gotten so like gross to me, because I'm just like what are these people doing with their time? Like, I don't even want to name them, because I don't want to give them like any more like thing than they have. And it's like, what are you doing with your time, where your whole life is about you know, just worrying about what this leftist or that leftist is doing, and not about, you know, what are we doing to actually actively build systems that are going
people
to
are dying, and you guys are worried about some high school bullshit on Twitter.
Exactly.
It's so exhausting.
What sucks to me is that
Twitter
like,
drama can be fun sometimes, but come on.
It can be fun, but it's like the thing that sucks about it is that the algorithms, I swear, they operate in a way, and maybe it's part of it is like, you know, implicit in some of us, even on the left, where it's like, when I check this out on different channels and stuff, and see the view count on different types of content, you know, and when you talk about certain things, if you're not talking about the Twitter drama, you tend to get so much less views, you know, and it's like the algorithm is happy to
if you cover anything real.
Exactly. It's like, once you start to cover real shit that matters, then all of a sudden that stuff, the algorithm isn't gonna, you know, play its game and prop that stuff up and recommend it and suggest it. They see that as the borderline content, and so it sucks. And that's why we have to think about building other platforms and institutions, because we cannot trust these undemocratic platforms to enable democracy in any way, or to support democracy, when the platform itself is inherently undemocratic. So it's like,
just a friendly reminder, once again, I'm going to say it, I really get annoyed when people try to claim that these big tech companies are private corporations, which I get that technically, legally, they are not private companies. They are completely intertwined with your government. There is no gray area. That is your government. Big tech is your government.
Reverse totalitarianism. Yes. Sheldon Wolin, one of the greatest, like, you know, left economists, you know, thinkers, in historians, he called it reverse totalitarianism, where these corporations are no longer beholden. You know, before you had like a government, and it was like bad that you gave your government too much power, but like at the very least, your government was beholden to like that region, because it can't move itself, like geographically, right? Like, so geographically, it was like it had some ties and some investment in like making sure that the people at least there were taken care of. But like with these corporations now, it's reverse totalitarianism, where there's no more patriotism or anything like that from these people, because they don't have to be beholden to any government. They can pack up and leave and play one country and one nation against another, the same way that Jeff Bezos plays one city and state against another when he's trying to decide where to put his Amazon headquarters. Is the same way these corporations can just up and leave and just decide. Michigan has these these great, like, it was like an industrial manufacturing like center of the country. And look at like Detroit, Michigan now, and like Flint, Michigan. Look what's happened in those areas where they used to be like a manufacturing hub of the country. But those corporations can up and decide that they can go and exploit some labor over in Mexico or Asia or Africa, and that's why we have to build solidarity with those workers over there and everywhere around the world, and not just look at it as like nationally, nationalistically, in sort of like isolationist thinking of like it's us against them, when it's really like, no, it's workers of the world need to unite. Like workers of the world unite together and recognize that we have one shared,
it's global solidarity against empire. That's what we need.
Exactly.
Global solidarity against empire. I mean,
yes.
We have to figure out a way to come together to combat this empirical, you know what I mean? Like there's no reason why there should ever be like a United States of America with that much power, control, and military, and that's just not okay. That's not. That's a sign of a very sick society. So and we are responsible as Americans to like fight against that actively, because it's our country doing this shit, and so we have to actively fight against that and resist that. And that's why it's something that we all have to pay attention to and treat as vital to our own survival. The survival of workers and the prosperity of workers everywhere. It's connected. We're all connected together in that way. Yes. But seriously, stop thinking about big tech companies as private companies. They're not private companies. They are your government. And so any censorship on Twitter or Google or whatever, that is state censorship. That is 100% state censorship. I don't care what you want to say. That there's no debate. I mean,
some
just
of these corporations have more power than like some small governments. Like some of these corporations, single corporations, like have more power than some of these, like other, different various.
And the amount of money that they donate to politicians, they own them. It's state censorship. I mean, Google owns the government. Facebook owns the government. Look at the Facebook and the Atlantic Council. Henry Kissinger sits on that board, and he decides who gets to have like Facebook pages. Come on, man, that's not okay. I mean, look at what Instagram's doing to Palestinian voices. It is state.
Facebook did it as well. Facebook was, silencing Palestinian voices in the middle of those protests. And absolutely, we gotta.
It all comes back to narrative control. It always comes back to narrative control. It's one of the biggest fights that we face. It's scary. It really is scary. But we've been going for a couple hours. I feel like this like flew by, which is crazy. But that's awesome, Sleepy Josh works a lot for everybody. So I always like to just try to keep him to 2 hours. So do you want to tell everybody?
Damn it, we need to.
He does. He has to like get his beauty rest so he can be energized.
We actually have to do another show after this. So.
I always like to tell people, because he is sleepy, you can buy him a coffee at if you go to his Twitter page at abortu, ABORTU. There's a buy me a coffee link. So go hook Sleepy Josh up with some coffee, because he's amazing and I couldn't do the show without him. So definitely go do that. Do you want to tell everybody where they can find your show and where they can find you on Twitter and all that stuff, so they can keep up with you guys? Seriously, I mean, I'm like kind of pissed that I just now found a show like 3 or 4 weeks ago. Like, it's really good. He has like really cool guests on to talk about a bunch of different just interesting topics, so you should definitely check it out. So let everybody know where they can find everything.
You can find us on YouTube at Radical Democracy. Just find us on YouTube there. You can find us on Twitch as well, Radical Democracy on Twitch. You can find us on Twitter. I'm at On to the Fifth on Twitter, ONTO FIFTH on Twitter. And you can also find us, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com, ko-fi.com/radical democracy. And you can also throw us a donation on Patreon as well, patreon.com/radical democracy. And we really appreciate the support. We are trying to survive off of this, so every dollar counts. And
support independent media.
Yes,
if you
yes,
can,
please.
if you can.
Please, yes. Only if you can afford to do so. We
Yes.
always say that. We always have that caveat. Like, please do not worry if you're strapped for cash. We're struggling so much right now. So we totally understand when folks aren't able to do it. You should feel no burden or no shame whatsoever for not being able to support us by just subscribing. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and share on social media.
Sharing's huge because the algorithm.
Massive. Absolutely. So we appreciate any support we can get. So thank you so much to everyone. And please support Misty. And if you're watching this, if you're coming here from the Radical Democracy Show, please subscribe to Misty's channel here and show some love and support it there as well.
Thank you. See, this is that solidarity we're talking about in independent media. We need more of this. It's nice.
Yes.
It makes my heart happy.
Looking forward to having you on the Radical Democracy Show.
Yeah, I would love to anytime. And the only thing I have for you guys before we sign out is just if you can donate and share the GoFundMe link for the billboards. We have the Home Run for Julian event coming up on June 14th, and we're going to be able to use the billboards to promote that event. So I would really like to get through at least like another 2-week contract on the billboards, and then we can maybe take a break for a little while. I would still love to keep the downtown one because Jesus Christ, I looked into an amazing location in that. But yeah, so that's the only thing I have for you guys. And just help promote the shit out of the Home Run for Julian tour, all of the events. You can go to I think is it Assange Defense or it's Assange Defense?
Yeah.
Assange. That's their Twitter handle is Assange Defense.
Yes.
Okay. There's Assange Defense and Defend Assange. And like how I always get names backwards, this is my struggle. So you can find the whole schedule on Assange Defense. So share all of those. The first one's in Miami on June 6th. And so Julian's dad and brother are going to be touring the United States to try to garner some more support and everything. So definitely check that out. And I will just see everybody next week. Thanks for watching.